Welcome to Doc NYC's Spring Showcase, our mid-year celebration of documentary films and series. My name is Bedatri Choudhury, and I'm a senior programmer at this festival. And I'm so glad to be talking to the director and producers of the film that you just watched, music by John Williams. Welcome, Laurent Bouzereau, director, producer, and producer Meredith Kaulfers. Thank you so much for sharing your film with us. My first question to you is, between the two of you, you've worked on documentaries on, so many of these epic personalities, be it Judy Blume, Faye Dunaway. Uh, I would love to know what about John Williams attracted you as a protagonist for your documentary.
So who starts? Do you want to start, Meredith, or?
No, you go, Laurent.
Oh my God. Well, you know, uh, um, the way it started was really my love for John Williams's music. I grew up in France, and basically, American movies, would arrive in France about 6 months after the American release. So I would buy the soundtrack albums before I saw the movies. So basically, my film education started with music. And I realized that my favorite soundtracks were all by this man named John Williams. And so it literally was the music of my childhood, the music of my film education. And about 30 years ago, I was very lucky to join Amblin and Steven Spielberg doing documentaries on his films, retrospective, some of them, and then I was on set with him. So, pretty much once or twice a year, I would get together with John Williams and talk to him about a specific film. And thus started kind of a friendship. And I would always ask him, John, when are we going to do a big feature doc about you? And he said, never, 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 never. and and about 2 years ago, when he turned 90, I was tasked with helping a big event at the Kennedy Center, and interviewed a lot of directors who had worked with him, just to do like a 2 minute little intro piece. Well, needless to say, those interviews lasted hours. And I said to Steven Spielberg, I said, this is crazy. We have all this incredible material between all the years I've been on scoring stages with you, and the years that you've been with your little home movie camera filming John, and now those interviews, we have to do a doc. And so it coincided with me meeting with Justin Wilkes and Meredith and Ron Howard's company, Imagine, and we were trying to find a project to do together. And Justin and Meredith literally said, when are you doing a documentary on John Williams? I'm like, oh my God, we're talking about it right now. So we formed a really happy family around John, and here we are.
Yeah, and to
Meredith, what
yeah,
attracted you to the project?
I was gonna say, I think we were talking about the kind of, there's icons and then there's John Williams, and I think what was interesting is, usually when you're talking about Judy Blume, or you're talking about some of the projects that we've done, Jim Henson or Laurent has done, Natalie Wood, Faye Dunaway, there's a couple, like outstanding features or performances that these people have done. When you look at John's career, it's staggering. He's scored over 100 films, and so even if people don't know his name, they know the music and they've grown up with it. And so Laurent saying it's a soundtrack to his childhood, I could say the same. I don't know if you would say the same, but I think everyone,
Oh,
if it wasn't,
that's
yeah,
for sure.
yeah. So everyone has that touchstone, whether it's E.T., Star Wars, Indiana Jones, Home Alone, and Harry Potter. Like, he has spanned the decades. He has spanned everyone. Everyone knows John's music, and so it's a no-brainer. And just to say a little bit more about the combination, you had Amblin and Steven Spielberg. We had Kathy Kennedy, Lucasfilm. We had Ron Howard, Brian Grazer at Imagine, and Laurent putting it all together. And then not only do you have the scoring, like the behind the scenes from Steven, but we also had the archive of Lucasfilm, which is incredible. So it was really a super group kind of coming together to tell John's story.
So, Laurent, how did you make John Williams say yes?
Well, it wasn't actually me, it was Steven Spielberg who got him to say yes. And I think, again, as to repeat what Meredith was just saying, the combination of Ron Howard, Steven, Kathy Kennedy, Frank Marshall, you can't say no to those people. But I have to tell you, there was one episode that I had with John prior to the film really going, is that I did get a call from Steven saying John is on board, he wants to do it. I'm like, oh my god, that's great. And then the following week I get a same call from Steven saying his enthusiasm has gone from 100% to about 60%, and it was diminishing pretty much by the hour. And I found myself at Amblin, I was doing something, and I had my computer in a room that was empty, and I go into the room, and there is John by himself. And I thought, this is really weird. Is this planned? And he starts talking to me, and we have this one-on-one exchange, about just general stuff, and then he says, out of nowhere, he says, I really don't want to do this documentary, Laurent. I don't want to talk about myself. It's very hard for me. I said, listen, John, it's not about you. And he looks at me, he's like, what is it about? It's about your music, and it's about your musicians, and it's about your relationship with incredible filmmakers and with your audience. So it's not, you know, um, going to be something that makes you uncomfortable. It's about what you do every day. And I think that sort of combining this with Stephen and Ron and Kathy and Frank, it really made him feel comfortable. And so we started, and I have to say he gradually felt more and more comfortable, to the point where I would bump into him and he would say, when are you coming back? I was just like, oh my god, I love this. And we would have discussions. He's like, are you getting what you need? I'm like, well, yes, but I'd love more of this. So it was a real collaboration, and that was thrilling to see him get very comfortable with discussing, the great benchmarks in his life and career, and he delivered really stories that I personally had not really heard before, and things that were very intimate to his process and to his life and to certain aspects of his work. And to me, it reassured me, because I didn't want this to feel like a vanity project, or like, a hit parade of all the great John Williams scores. I really wanted it to be a story that could be, I would say, arguably a learning tool. One of the great things that happened, Disney organized a big screening, and we had a premiere at the AFI, and the next day I went to do another screening and in Long Beach, and a kid came to me and he said, I was at the screening last night, and I wanted to talk to you and thank you, and so he came to Long Beach to say thank you, and I said, well, that's great. And he's like, I abandoned playing the piano a few years ago, and seeing the film got me interested in playing the piano again, and that's thanks to this movie. And so that made me feel great, because I'm like, wow, mission accomplished, right?
And how did you pick the other people in the film that you speak to?
Well, we wanted to we had a big discussion with all of us, but including John himself, about who are the filmmakers that have really made an impression on his, that are significant to his work. Not everybody was available. Everybody's making movies, and once we got going, Meredith will attest to that. It was like, kind of scary pace, but most people were available, and that was really fantastic. The one that came in as a surprise was Chris Martin. Actually, one of our producers, Daryl Frank from Amblin, said, I just went to a Coldplay a concert, and they were playing E.T. as they came on stage. I'm like, what? And it turns out Chris Martin is a friend of Steven and a friend of of Amblin. So here we were interviewing Chris Martin, and I had no idea what I was going to ask him because I couldn't really get the connection. So I queued up on my iPhone the score of ET, and I gave it to him. I say, "Here, talk about this," and he started playing it, and you pretty much see his face lit up, and that to me was significant in that it really underlined the fact that that overused term of being timeless, that John Williams represents. Here I am with someone who couldn't be much further musically from John, and yet it's part of his DNA. So, and it's not the movies. Yes, the movies are part of how we remember the music in many ways, but John has transcended that by doing concert of just of his music, and without the visuals with them, and I think that's a gigantic contribution to the art of film music, and showing that film music can live on its own as and be recognized as an art form, which by the way was a big deal for me in making this film, was to help people not take John for granted. It was not that easy. He was at the Boston Pops, and they didn't want to play film music. Now, that's a big deal when you're a film music composer and you're at the head of the Boston Pops. And you walked away and then walked back once they had discussed it. But up until John Williams, I really feel that music by great composers was sort of invisible. There were some famous collaborations between directors like Hitchcock and Bernard Herrmann, even though it didn't end well between them. They made a significant amount of movies together. And a composer named Georges Delerue and Francois Truffaut was very famous for where I come from. But really, John Williams and his iconic collaborations with, Steven and George Lucas and Ron Howard and others, really established film music as an art form in a way that had never been recognized before. So reminding the audience watching this documentary that there was a struggle, that it wasn't that easy, I think brought a lot of kind of, unexpected drama to the film.
Meredith, I'd love to hear from you.
Yeah, I was just gonna say. I mean, Laurent brought up a lot of good points. The one other interview that I really loved was J.J. Abrams, because J.J. Abrams grew up a fan of his scores, and then you see it in the movie, and then for him to get to live out a dream to not only make a Star Wars movie, but to get to collaborate with John Williams, like that is one of the most beautiful moments for me in that film. It always kind of makes me emotional. So I think we got everybody we could possibly get, as much as it was, you're like, where do we stop? Where do you draw the line? Because everybody would want to talk about John. Everybody was influenced by him. So yeah.
I was also so touched by the Steven Spielberg and John Williams friendship, and which is, of course, such a great work partnership, but the very intimate and tender friendship that we see, like Steven Spielberg kissing John Williams on the cheek and hugging him, those parts of the film really stand out to me. Laurent and Meredith, I'd love to both, and Steven Spielberg is also a producer on the film. So I'd love to know, A, how did you not give in to the impulse of making this about the friendship of Stevie and Johnny? But how did you strike that balance?
Well, it's a great question because I was trying to find a way in that was immediately iconic of what the journey of the film was. And I didn't want to start with I was born, blah blah blah. So so I was at Amblin filming with John, and I wanted to do a bunch of little piano things with him, and I had told Steven, I said, "Oh, I'm filming with John today," and he's like, "Great." And suddenly he crashes the interview. and, and suddenly we see the mic, we see everything, and they start talking, and I kind of, embrace that moment to really show in the film that this film is about friendships and collaborations. And in the case of John and Stephen, it's actually, people sometimes say, oh, it's a father son relationship. It's not, it's a brotherhood. Um, and it's a brotherhood based really. So they had done Sugarland Express together, and then came Jaws, and I think Jaws was the film and the collaboration that really cemented this brotherhood that has lasted over 50 years, because Jaws was, I just finished a film on Jaws, so I know a lot about it, and it was a really traumatic experience. It was a movie that was potentially going to destroy careers, not make careers. And and when you think about the state of mind of Steven at the time he finished Jaws and is editing the film, and he goes and sees his composer, and the composer says, "This is my theme for Jaws." You have to be really, two notes basically. You have to be really confident in your relationship with your musical composer partner to say, okay, I'm gonna trust you, and that's gonna become the voice of the shark that wasn't working and the voice of this movie. And sure enough, it becomes, Stephen, not physically as known as he is today, goes the same week the movie came out, goes to get an ice cream, and people online are humming the theme, ta da, ta da. So suddenly, you know, the music, in essence, saves the film from not having a mechanical shark that worked, and suddenly becomes pretty much a musical. I mean, to me, Jaws is a musical, because the character, that is the shark is really mostly, music. So I think that to me is so recognizable, and it checks, for lack of a better way of putting it, so many boxes about the humanity of both Stephen and John. Um, Something that has transcended time. Listen, we're celebrating 50 years of Jaws this year, and the music is a huge part of it. It was a hook, pun intended, into this movie immediately, and I think that audiences immediately could relate to the story of friendship, the story of collaborations, and I find that very inspiring. In an industry where you constantly hear of backstabbing, that this is actually the opposite. You know. It's all about loyalty and understanding each other's, visual and musical language. And so, and Stephen is very musical, and I thought, that's the way in. But, then as we transition into other parts of John's career, you were more at ease because we had established this friendship. But it definitely was a through line where we kept coming back to it. But as Meredith said about JJ, it was important to see and show that with each new generation of filmmakers that was coming along, Chris Columbus, JJ Abrams, and so on, John was part of those transitions. Very few composers of his generations, were not only able to do that or did it at all. So it just speaks to, again, that word timeless nature of his style and musical language, which again I think this film really underlines it in a way that may have been taken for granted prior to the film being made.
And also, and especially because you said it's inspiring, and you guys are filmmakers who collaborate with people every day. That's what you do. What did you learn as filmmakers from their collaboration or from the way John Williams collaborates with directors across the age line.
I was just say, yeah, I was just say the one thing that I think is, I'm trying to think of the exact moment or quote, but I feel like it's around JJ too. But the fact that he is so collaborative and so like vulnerable still at this stage in his career and all the things that he's done, that he still wants to know what the director thinks, what other people think, and it's like, what is it? Is it JJ, right? Where he says, what are your what's your notes on this? It's like, sure,
And the answer is the same
yeah,
every
it's
time.
yeah, exactly. So I think, to me, I think we, Laurent and myself, this is our first time collaborating. And we just had dinner last week, and we're talking about this, is the ease of a relationship over the years. So it's like, once you work with somebody once, you develop a shorthand. But knowing that somebody who is as iconic as John Williams, when he's working with Steven or working with JJ or a new filmmaker, he's going to still want that feedback, want that collaboration. And so it's okay to also tell people, hey, I have a couple thoughts on this, and then you figure out the next step. So that, to me, is one of the most inspiring things, because we are filmmakers, as you said, and it's always a process. And to know that people like Stephen and John are still doing the process that we are all doing every day is kind of inspiring.
And actually, there's another story that really moved me, um, and it's it relates to Star Wars, and there was a sequence when George Lucas said, I'd like to try something else, and we play the two versions of it, and George says, with another composer there would have been friction, but never with John. He's always a prince, and I think that is so moving to me, because it truly underlines the sort of mutual understanding and respect, and that, again, we take for granted. Many contemporaries of John were fired from movies. I mean, I was mentioning Bernard Herrmann, who had made, huge films with Hitchcock, including Psycho, Vertigo. I mean, some of the best scores ever. He was fired from Torn Curtain. Uh, um, so those things happen. John never, because he is John. And again, we take him for granted, and I hope that the spotlight we're putting on him is really showing to anyone aspiring to collaborate in this art form that is cinema, is able to take something for them, because it's not easy, and yet he makes it look like it's easy, you know.
When I was watching this, I was like, this is a documentary. Usually when you see a documentary about a celebrity, about someone so big, there is a section related to the bad parts, to the times this person has misbehaved. But this one, nothing. So as filmmakers who wants the drama, did you guys ever go, where's the drama? This guy's an amazing 10 on 10 A plus guy throughout.
Well, I as filmmakers, we always embrace the person. I'm not a reporter.
Mm.
I am not an interrogator. Um, I am a storyteller. So I'm interested in the stories that those people have to tell, and how they want to tell it, and guide me through the sort of, puzzle that is a long life, and a long career well lived. I have to say, I do tons of research, so I can adjust. I had a playlist of his music. I was literally living this man's music. As I should. Um, you said drama. I approached everything through music, um, and I knew that he had lost his wife, um, right before he got into Star Wars and everything. But I didn't want to ask that question. I didn't want to say, "Oh, and your wife passed away. Tell me about that." So I said to him, I said, "So John, you composed your first violin concerto. Tell me about how that came about." And he said, "I lost my wife, da 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 da." And I was so proud of the fact that I got into his heart and his soul through music, not through a straightforward question about loss, and he gave me so much about, and it's in the film as almost unedited, you know. And then there was, the whole situation with the Boston Pops, which was John quitting, which is a pretty big thing, and I didn't really know how to approach this in a way that would feel, elegant, if that's the word. And I literally talked about Herman and Hitchcock, and saying, how Bernard Herrmann always felt that film music was lesser than anything, and that he didn't want to be called a film music composer. Did you ever encounter that? And boom, he delivered the story about Boston Pops, right? So it's not manipulation, it's just trying to really embrace who you're talking to, and understand, how all those stories are going to come together in a way that's very, that feels, not forced and not uncomfortable, but moving. And I have to say, Meredith, I don't know what you think.
Well, I have to say that I think I understand the impulse of the question of the drama, and I think we all had a conversation around this project of this is not the story. This is not a dramatic story and some like takedown. This is the celebration of one of the most iconic composers, probably the most iconic composer that is still with us. And so there was no desire for that kind of a story. The story was what an incredible life, what an incredible career. And for me, this, him not wanting to make a documentary about himself is like also so charming. And him, he was resisting for a long time before we did it. And I just feel so happy that we were able to tell his story.
And by the way, there's nothing wrong with doing documentaries, just like feel good movies. There is like,
Well,
there's a
I
feel
know.
good
So there's a time and a
documentary,
place. There's a time
you
and a
know.
place. You're not. It would be weird if you were doing a documentary about a subject that needed to be taken down. You don't need to take down John Williams. You need to elevate him.
But again, it was about finding a rhythm. This is a documentary about music.
Yeah.
And worked really, really hard with three editors and all the producers. I mean, everybody was just so on board with a story that had an unusual pacing and structure, and something that just felt very inspiring and exciting. And hopefully we succeeded a little bit.
I think so.
No, I think so too, and which is why you're here. Unfortunately, we are at time, but Laurent Bouzereau, uh, Meredith Kaulfers, thank you so much for joining us and
Thank you.
sharing your film Music by John Williams with us. For those watching, this film is streaming on Disney Plus, so please, watch it again and again because it's absolutely magical. And please continue to enjoy the Spring Showcase programming through June 13th. Thank you so much for joining, both of you.
Thank you.
Thank you.